And thank you everyone for joining us for today's e-showcase, How to Unlock Savings and Revenues with Biogas Utilization. Thank you to our sponsor, ENGIE. I have the pleasure today to introduce our presenters, Boyd Gregg, Senior Business Development Manager at ENGIE North America, Robbie Bhaskar, Senior Wastewater Engineer and Commercial Lead, ENGIE North America, John Paul Jewell, Regional Sales Manager, Northeast ENGIE North America. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this presentation over to today's presenters.
Thank you, Regina. Appreciate the introduction. So my name is Boyd Gregg. As I said, I'm a business development manager at ENGIE. Much of what I'm going to talk about today is really focusing on the biogas to RNG markets. And that's because that's kind of where we see the most commercial opportunity for wastewater treatment and converting your biogas to renewable natural gas. So quick, I guess what I would say biogas 101 is when we look at a decatherm or MMBTU or some quantity of biogas, really the way we think about that is in two separate, kind of in two separate buckets. One is the fuel value of that gas, and the other is what is called the renewable attribute. And so in this case, I'm using the RIN or the renewable identification number, but as you can see, there's a vast disparity. So when we sell this gas, you get both the commodity value, the fuel value, the $1.80 down there, and at today's current market rates, that's about what it's trading for. And then on top of that, you get the renewable attribute value, so $39.09 at today's value. So it's quite a vast disparity, and this is really what makes the biogas to renewable natural gas market work. This is where the vast majority of the value is in this gas is in selling the renewable attribute. And so some of the terms I'll use today, decatherm, MMBTU, those are kind of interchangeable. And it's important to note that 77,000 BTUs equal 1 RIN. That's a mistype down there, which is also equal to 1 ethanol gallon equivalent of fuel. So that's really where the origins of this market began. And so with that, I'll kind of give you a brief history lesson. This biogas ecosystem really began long ago with landfills and really with some dairies, and they, as you're probably all aware, many of those entities were flaring biogas or just vending it directly to the atmosphere. And so the origins of this really came in trying to reduce those emissions and do something productive with those fuels. So the RIN market is what I'll talk about a little bit today, but that market began in the early 2000s. And so when we talk about the RIN and I talk about those 77,000 BTUs, it was really created for the ethanol industry. So we're really taking advantage of the economics of that, but that's really where this all began, is in selling renewable fuels as ethanol. So we have a couple of different programs that are out there right now that are regulated. One, again, I mentioned the Renewable Identification Number program. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. And in California, we have the Low Carbon Fuel Standard program as well. So those are game changers. That's really what incentivized the commercial production of these fuels. But down here at the bottom, I mentioned these have some market exposure. So there's potentially high returns, but there's also some risk in that and I'll show this shortly. The prices of RINs and some of these credits can fluctuate. And then quickly on the right here, we're looking at historical production of biofuels. So these are both RINs and then this little gray gray bar back here shows renewable natural gas production, and that's typically been at parity with the RIN market. Sorry, I'm keep pressing an arrow here. Okay, so biogas production in the U.S. So the U.S. has a very large biogas market, and really what I want to show here is that there is a vast untapped opportunity. And so you can see here the blue on this bar chart shows how much of the biogas we're actually capturing and doing something productive with. Flaring is not included in that. So this would be electricity generation or conversion to RNG or some kind of use for heat. And the green box here is potential. So you can see, particularly in the wastewater market, we have only exploited a very small portion of the feedstock. And when we look at U.S. versus Europe, we're producing about 75 million decatherms in the U.S. versus 133 million in Europe. So the good news is there's lots of low-hanging fruit still available. There are some challenges. I guess the last thing I'll note is when we look at this chart, even if we exploited all of these feedstocks and converted all of this to renewable natural gas, it would be but a very small drop in the bucket compared to the 31 billion decatherms that of natural gas demand that we have in the United States currently. So when I talk about the RIN program, so again, this was sort of the flagship program that the EPA created. Every year, the EPA, and actually in December of 2022, they released a sort of a 3-year forecast for what's called the renewable volume obligation, which tells producers and consumers of these RINs how many need to be produced in a given year. So we now have, I guess, foresight for 2023, well, 2024, 2025, 2026 now for what the renewable volume obligation is going to look like, which tells us, potentially what that market's going to look like moving forward. Here, what I have shown is the price of 2 different classifications of RINs, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But as I mentioned, there are some price fluctuations here. So looking back at 2017, the value of a D3 RIN was approximately $2. Now it's trading, that price is around $3. The D5 RINs are obviously slightly less expensive, and you can see they sort of track together. But again, that renewable attribute, this $3 per 77,000 BTUs, that's what generates the vast majority of the value of biogas. Who's the primary buyers of these RINs are large fuel producers. So Exxon, Chevron, BP, Amoco, all those in the United States are the majority buyers of these renewable identification numbers. So real quick, classifications. So when we're in the wastewater or landfill space, we're looking really at these D3 and D5 RINs. So these are all the different classifications. But one thing to note is that up until last year, really, if you had an anaerobic digester and you mixed food waste into it, you immediately derated the value of your biogas from a D3 RIN to a D5 RIN. The EPA has given us a little bit more clarity on that now, which is good, and they're allowing something called apportionment. And so what we can do is figure out how much of the biogas is associated with food waste or co-digestion, and that will be classified as a D5 RIN. But the biogas produced from sewage sludge or landfills or anything else can be sold as a D3 RIN. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, here kind of some economics of it. So our one thing to note is that the large buyers, Exxon, Chevron, BP, they usually buy these in 25% at a 25% discount. So while you don't get that full value of the RIN, you're still getting the vast majority of the value of the biogas is tied up in that renewable attribute. So just real quick, want to talk about the growth of the RNG market, biogas RNG market, and production in the United States. So again, this renewable volume obligation is going up every year, and it has really since its inception. You can see the growth of U.S. biogas production back in 2017. So next year it'll be roughly triple what it was in 2017. And this is really a function of the fact that the incentives are so good right now to do this work. And in fact, I'll talk real quick in a couple minutes about the Inflation Reduction Act and what that did, but that spurred additional investment in technology and in this market. And so while the regulated market, the RINs and the LCFS, does create it's a significant portion of the revenue right now, and it has been. We do expect that voluntary buyers and the voluntary market will eventually overtake that regulated market in the future, and those will be the primary buyers. And so some of those are, think about large commercial and industrial customers are buying the renewable attributes so they can use a green or sustainable fuel for their businesses. One example would be like cement production. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today talking about how cement production contributes about 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and so they're a lot of the cement producers, they use a significant amount of fuel to create clinker, and they're looking for green alternatives to purchase natural gas. So again, a huge demand currently in the regulated market, the RIN market, which goes to transportation. But we expect in the near future that the voluntary market will overtake that and be the largest market for disposal of biogas. Real quick, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. So most of us, I think, are familiar with this. There were significant incentives to invest in biogas infrastructure in the United States, and a lot of those investment tax credits are set to expire on December 31st of this year. So if you don't have a project in construction right now, it's likely that you won't be getting the investment tax credit incentives. But the good news is a lot of incentives are going to remain and convert to production tax credits. And so this 45Z clean fuel production tax credit, that could be up to $1 per gallon fuel equivalent. So that'd be an additional $1 per 77,000 BTUs, provided certain emission standards are met. And that will carry on from 2025 to 2027. So again, an additional $13 per MMBTU or decatherm. There's an additional energy tax production credit that applies to cogen systems that are running off of biogas. And actually, this is a good transition to turn it over to my colleague Ravi and let him talk about some prime movers and end uses of this biogas. Thank you.
Thank you, Boyd. So as Boyd alluded to earlier, if you're a wastewater plant, there's two primary ways to utilize the biogas you're producing. The first is cogeneration, is actually generating electricity and using it in your plant or exporting it to the grid. And the other is purifying the gas, cleaning it up, and injecting it into the natural gas pipeline. Because one of the benefits of the current marketplace is that gas can be generated anywhere in the country, and the purchasers of these RIN credits can exist anywhere else. And so once the molecules are injected into the pipeline, the producer gets the RIN credit regardless of the end use of the product. So when you harness biogas as an asset, basically, you have cogeneration, as I showed here on the left side, and then you have pipeline injection. And one of the benefits, of course, of using a cogeneration system is that you have waste heat. When you burn gas in a cogeneration system, you only produce between 39 to 45% of the energy as electricity. The rest of it is waste heat, and that waste heat can be harnessed to heat the anaerobic digesters, because anaerobic digesters function most effectively at physiological temperatures, which is 95 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. So by running cogeneration, and perhaps one of the most significant advantages of cogeneration is that you use all of the energy that's present in the biogas, but you also have a waste heat to heat your digesters. With pipeline injection, you don't get the waste heat, but you do get to convert all of the methane and monetize it. And as Boyd showed earlier, the economics right now are strongly in favor of pipeline injection if you have enough gas that you produce. So the advantage of cogeneration basically is you can use the power internally without complicated interconnect procedures. If you were to inject it into the pipeline, you have to spend some money to have interconnect fees. And in California, for example, that can run to millions of dollars. So for plants less than 50 MGD, and that's based on our experience, and the reason for that is you don't produce a lot of gas if you're less than 50 MGD. It's economically beneficial if you're less than 50 MGD to run a cogeneration system. And when you do, you have to clean the gas. You have to remove hydrogen sulfide, siloxanes, and moisture. Hydrogen sulfide, when it's burned, produces sulfuric acid, which corrodes the engines. Siloxanes burned form silica, which is basically sand, which accumulates in the engine cylinders. So in order to offset all of these problems, you have to do a lot of preventive maintenance, and that preventive maintenance can cost a lot of money. So anywhere between 6 to 9 cents per kilowatt hour. And if your utility rates are low, then you may not have, it may not be cost effective to do cogeneration. Again, if you produce enough gas, you may want to consider conversion to pipeline quality gas and RNG. So now there are other technologies that you can use. The most common way of cogeneration, of course, is with reciprocating engines and turbines. There are several manufacturers that have been around for a long time. You have fuel cells, which electrochemically convert the energy in biogas into electricity, and those have been, and several plants do have those. The disadvantage, of course, is that they are heavily dependent on gas quality. They're easily poisoned. Fuel cells or reciprocating engines have the problems that I identified in the earlier slide. The third technology is a linear expansion engine. It's very new. There's not a lot of experience with that. There's a couple of plants in Northern California that are piloting that, and basically they use the energy in the biogas to convert it directly to motion without burning it. So that has a lot of turn down according to the manufacturer. So you can produce less energy or more energy depending on how much gas your digesters are producing. Again, there's not a lot of experience yet. It is very new technology, but you can, if you can Google it, you can learn about it from the manufacturer's website. So what do you have to do to make biogas? Basically, you take the sludge from a plant, which is waste activated sludge, which is basically dead microorganisms from the wastewater treatment process, and then you mix that with primary sludge if you have primary clarifiers. Primary sludge and thickened waste activated sludge go into a digester. They produce gas. Typically, The sludge stays in a digester for 15 to 30 days, the minimum amount of time that you need to have it there in order to comply with the biosolids disposal requirements for Class B biosolids is 15 days. But if you have it stay there longer, it produces more gas. That gas is then scrubbed and fed to a generator. So that's basically how the process works. There are many ways to optimize the process to produce the maximum amount of gas. And I'll talk about that in some of the other slides. But if you're running a cogeneration system, basically you take the gas, you scrub it, and then you utilize a portion of the gas or the waste heat from the cogeneration system to heat the digesters. So if you were to produce renewable natural gas, what you have to do is remove the carbon dioxide. Biogas, the composition of biogas is anywhere between 55 to 65% methane and between 30 and 35% carbon dioxide, and it contains trace amounts of hydrogen sulfide, siloxanes, and moisture. So in order to produce pipeline quality gas, you have to remove the moisture, you have to remove the hydrogen sulfide, the siloxanes, and you have to remove the carbon dioxide. What that does is it effectively raises the heating value from 550 to 600 BTU per cubic foot all the way up to 1,000 BTU per cubic foot. You have three basic technologies, and they scale at different price points. So if you produce between, say, less than 300 cubic feet per minute of biogas, pressure swing adsorption is the best way to go. And higher than that, you can select between membrane separation. And of course, if you have very high production of biogas, water absorption is the most economical. Basically, pressure swing adsorption works by changing the pressures in a series of tanks. At high pressures, the CO2 is absorbed, and then the methane goes through, and then when you release the pressure, the CO2 is released. So with a combination of valves and compression, you can separate the carbon dioxide from the methane, and that's how pressure swing adsorption works. Membrane separation basically passes the gas through a series of tubes. Carbon dioxide is highly polar, so it is retained in the membrane. The methane is non-polar, so that passes through the membrane, and with multiple stages, you can effectively produce 99% methane, and then discharge the carbon dioxide to the air. And actually, there are some projects where you can capture the CO2, and that reduces the carbon intensity of the gas even further, and allows you to qualify for other credits besides the RIN values that Boyd alluded to earlier. So we can answer questions about those later on if we need to. So those are basically the three technologies for converting biogas to renewable natural gas. And the advantages and disadvantages are shown here. You've got pressure swing adsorption. It's relatively simple. It is low cost for less than 300 CFM or so. Anything higher than that, you can, like I said, membrane separation and water absorption works. Water absorption actually works by absorbing the carbon dioxide in a highly alkaline solvent, NDMA, and then heating it to discharge the carbon dioxide. So the advantages and disadvantages are presented here. Again, there's relatively fewer vendors for the pressure swing adsorption, and there's multiple vendors for the water absorption, and for membrane separation, there's a couple of vendors. So we, again, depending on your scale and your capital costs and the amount of gas you can produce, you can select between one or the other of the options. So the flow diagram for Biogas to RNG with pipeline injection, again, is similar, except instead of burning the biogas in a cogeneration engine, you compress it and run it through one of the treatment processes, whether it's pressure swing adsorption or membrane separation or water sorption, and you inject it into the pipeline. Now, since economically it makes sense right now for the larger plants, you'll typically have multiple digesters, sometimes as many as 15 or 16 digesters, very large plants, much higher than 50 million gallons a day or thereabouts. But essentially the processes are pretty much the same. Again, you can optimize the process to produce more sludge. At one of our customers, we do what's called carbon redirection or chemically enhanced primary treatment, where you produce more carbon-rich primary sludge, and that produces more gas in the anaerobic digester. But it also has a secondary benefit that it reduces the energy demand for aeration in the secondary treatment processes, which you have to supply oxygen to remove the BOD, the biochemical oxygen demand in wastewater secondary treatment. So when you remove more of the carbon using carbon redirection, you have two benefits. You produce more biogas and you reduce the energy demand for aeration in subsequent stages of treatment. Again, if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer those later. This is a lot of material that we're trying to cover in a short period of time. So I'll turn it over at this point to my colleague, John Paul Jewell, and he's going to talk about specific examples.
Thank you, Ravi. My name is John Paul Jewell. I manage ENGIE's sales team in the Northeast. I'm going to share a couple of case studies of a few different applications of biogas and wastewater projects, and then walk through a little bit of the process of how we undertake these partnerships. So I will start at West County Wastewater District in Richmond, California, where ENGIE has been working with the facility for the last few years to upgrade and implement energy efficiency measures that include building a cogeneration system to generate electricity from their digester gas. We're also adding solar and a battery, and the site will have a microgrid to enable critical operations to continue to stay powered on during utility outages, which are fairly common in the region. Another piece of this, beyond the significant savings and greenhouse gas reductions that I wanted to highlight, is that as part of the implementation of this program, we were able to hire interns from the local community college district who now work full-time at the plant. There's also been a significant amount of community outreach to including branding and multimedia efforts to make sure the community is aware of all of the environmental initiatives happening at the plant. Moving a little further east to Denver, Colorado, at the Metro Water Recovery plant, they have been leveraging a P3 with ENGIE, a public-private partnership, to get electricity from their digester gas through a long-term energy services agreement. So ENGIE actually owns and operates the 2 gas turbines at that facility, which provide electricity and hot water for the plant. And in that regard, Denver didn't have to use any of its own capital for the system, and there are some performance metrics over each year. So that equipment is aging, and I'm under the impression that Denver is in the planning stages to evaluate whether to reconfigure their site to do biogas cleanup and injection, as Ravi was describing, to take advantage of the RIN market. So they have been running cogen for a while there, and I think they are looking at the opportunity to reconfigure the plant to take advantage of those incentives that are out there. I will go just a little further east to Florida, to Broward County, where ENGIE has worked with that plant to, under the state's performance contracting mechanism, to implement a fog collection system, so fats, oils, and greases, to boost their digester gas production, clean it up, and burn it in a cogen system. That site offsets about 25% of their electricity needs with their digester gas, and it has guaranteed savings, so if it doesn't perform, the financial risk to the payback of the system is eliminated. So I'll just touch on a little bit how to go through the process and what the procurement looks like before we open up for questions. So oftentimes a plant manager or a wastewater treatment district has one specific problem they're trying to solve. It may be, or it may be a whole bunch. So we like to encourage our customers to start with their goals in mind. Is it greenhouse gas reductions? Is it keeping your permits within a certain range due to tightening restrictions or standards? Is there something breaking and you need to upgrade it, but you don't have a capital or you have limited capital? Whatever those drivers are, the process generally looks the same. We like to start with your end goal in mind. And we encourage you to select a partner through some sort of qualifications process, or if your state requires it, run an RFP. And then your partner can do an audit of your facilities, look at all of your existing operations, think about the solutions you need. And then we would also want to look for whether there's room for additional energy efficiency measures to sort of increase your savings. So that maybe include lighting, process improvements, adding solar, microgrids, etc. We like to think about financing. So sometimes our customers will have the ability to issue a bond, or they have some capital. Sometimes they have nothing and they need someone to bring equity with them. So that's a big part of how this is all structured. We also look at what incentives are available and help you take advantage and apply for those. We go through the design process with you, engaging the community as needed. If there's a desire for things like internship programs, we can look into those. And then we evaluate cost versus savings, what guarantees are needed. And then once a scope is nailed down, we do run a competitive procurement process for materials and labor, and to bring back a firm fixed price that can then be contracted on. So we also would want to think about at this stage your operations and maintenance. So whether you need a post-construction services agreement to operate and maintain the plant, or if you just need training so your own staff can maintain the plant, those options are on the table. And then in many cases, our customers will want a performance guarantee after construction. So to make sure that energy savings are coming in. So that's another consideration. I believe I will stop there and we will open it up for questions. I will just say that there are lots of different ways to do this. We shared 3 examples. There are many more out there that both Ravi and Boyd have worked with, and I'm sure all of you here have your own challenges and solutions and proposals. So we'd be happy to think through any of the questions you have. And yeah, I'll stop there and open it up.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. We do have several great questions that are in the chat. I'm going to ask these questions in the order that they were received. And I know that there has been a few answers that's been posted into the chat, but if you could please just go ahead and expound on those or just reiterate your response. So we'll start with the very first one. For CHP waste heat after supplying heat to the AD, is there low-grade heat available for reuse, and how would one recoup lower temperature waste heat?
Typically, there's 2 sources of heat coming out of a cogeneration system, from the exhaust gas and from the water jacket in the cylinders. The exhaust gas is, of course, higher grade heat, and the water jacket is lower grade heat. But generally, nearly all of the waste heat is used for heating the digesters, and there's not much waste heat that can be economically recovered that's left over after heating the digesters. And in fact, if you're in cold climates like in Canada, for example, you use all of the waste heat, and then you may have to burn additional biogas to augment the waste heat from the cogeneration system.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And I believe this question was responded to in the chat, but you may want to expound on your response. What size plants are needed to make pipeline injection feasible? And I believe another follow-up to that is, what size plant can produce that?
Yeah, so I was trying to answer that. I mean, as usual, it's not like a very straightforward answer. It depends on a lot of things. Do you have primary clarifiers? What's the strength of your wastewater coming into a wastewater treatment plant? So what does the influent look like? There are quite a different number of factors, but let's say somewhere over 10 million gallons a day is kind of the what I would think if you had primary clarifiers. If you don't, then slightly larger. But those are kind of the and typical municipal wastewater treatment plant BOD. So somewhere 200 to 300 milligrams per liter of BOD in the influent. and that would probably make enough gas that you could do something, either CHP or pipeline injection. Does that, hopefully that answers the question.
And if it does not, just go ahead and just chat to us and let us know if that satisfied your question, the response to your question, and we will review it again. So the next question is for RNG. If you meet, say, 98% CH4 quality, does that mean why CH4 slip?
I don't. I think it was the question was would there be like 98% tail CO2 in the tail gas? So yeah, there would be a couple things in the tail gas. CO2 being the main component, hydrogen sulfide being the other. But yeah, the tail gas is very concentrated CO2. So if you look at what's in biogas coming off of a anaerobic digester, it's roughly 65% methane, 30 to 35% CO2, and then 1 or 2% hydrogen sulfide and some other trace things, siloxanes, as Ravi mentioned. And so the H2S, in some form or another, is going to come out, whether you're using PSA or water absorption. It may release at some point.
Okay, great. Yes, I do see where that question was restated a little later on with more definition to it. There is a question that may be referring to something else that you referred to earlier, but it just states, what about in SCFM?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so let's say I was trying to answer that in decatherms or MMBTUs, but I mean, roughly those are equivalent. So, somewhere around 250 cubic feet per minute of gas is probably what we'd need. And I'd say that number is coming down. I mean, as we see the value of the renewable attributes go up, the threshold or what the floor is for gas production's going down. So we can continue to look at smaller and smaller systems because these value the demand for the RNG, the prices people are paying for it are increasing. Regina, I saw an interesting question. I think it was from Kenneth Rosario Gonzalez.
Okay.
What is the conservative approach to determining how much biogas to put into the pipeline while prioritizing powering their auxiliaries first and warming up water for the anaerobic digestion, then providing the access to the RNG pipeline? So this is an interesting one, and it really depends on who your interconnecting utility is, who's going to the local distribution company that may be taking the gas and physically putting it in their system. But I will tell you, we worked with a number of different utilities across the country that tell us we can put all of the biogas into their system, and then we can buy natural gas because, as I showed earlier, it's much, much, much less expensive. And so, and depending on, again, what utility connection you're using or where you're injecting this gas, you would typically be better off selling all of your produced biogas as a renewable attribute or as renewable natural gas, and then purchasing what natural gas you need to run auxiliaries or firing up boilers or providing heat in the facility. Because again, that you get that full whatever it ends up being, $30 per decatherm to sell it as renewable natural gas, and you can probably buy it at retail for about $4 per decatherm. Hopefully that answers that question.
All right, and again, if you want to just send us a quick chat, let us know if you need some more information on your question. And so there was a question right before that one that says, how do you balance the needs for carbon for gas generation versus nutrient removal?
That is an excellent question. Again, and it depends on the economics. If you do need some carbon for nutrient removal, that is to keep the nitrifying bacteria and the denitrification processes. And many plants, as you know, supply a source of carbon with methanol. Okay, and so we put methanol into the to assist in the denitrification as a carbon source. You have to look at the cost of methanol versus how much money you're getting from the extra biogas that you produce. You could, in theory, starve your microorganisms of carbon, uh, send all the carbon over to the digesters, and still have to put in methanol. But you can simulate, using a whole plant model like BioWin, how much carbon you need for nutrient removal versus how much more carbon you're going to produce as biogas. But that is an excellent question, and the answer depends on how much on the influence strength of your wastewater, the size of your aeration basins, how much methanol you need to produce, and how much gas you're producing, and the economics overall.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And so the next one, I believe, looks like it has been responded to in the chat. John, did you want to speak to that one just so everyone can kind of hear your explanation? Does ENGIE assist prospective clients sourcing funds from IRA or BIL?
Yeah, happy to. So I'll just reiterate that we aren't tax advisors, so you'll need to work with your own tax team on interpreting and submitting the IRA and any federal tax incentive type stuff. But if we were your partner for implementation, we would be the ones to provide documentation, help you with the paperwork, things like that on the back end that would ensure you are able to take advantage and document the expenses and that they are qualifying expenses.
All right, great. Thank you. And Boyd, I think this one may be for you. It just states that Boyd mentioned the low-hanging fruit opportunities for biogas production at wastewater facilities. What are some examples of low-hanging fruit? How do we identify this? What are the more cost-effective options that you typically see?
Yeah, so one of the things that we like to explore, I guess, a little bit are opportunities for co-digestion. So when I say co-digestion, that would be taking food production waste, for example, which has a lot of carbon. Ravi, talked a lot about the carbon stream and how that influences biogas production. But accepting organic liquid waste or high strength organic waste from food production facilities or fats, oils, and greases that might be collected upstream, so they're not in your collection system. Taking those and injecting those directly into the anaerobic digester. Again, that has a really high carbon content that can, and typically the utility can collect tipping fee revenue from that. So not only are you generating tipping fee revenue, you're keeping some of this stuff from getting into your collection system, but it tremendously amplifies the amount of biogas that an anaerobic digester is producing. So we can often see the doubling of gas production, implementing what I would call reasonable co-digestion programs. And so this waste is typically hauled in trucks, and we work with a number of different companies that do that work, and so we can help source that material as well. So when we talk about what size wastewater treatment plant, we've seen much smaller, 2.5, 5 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plants that can generate enough biogas for potential pipeline injection because they implement a co-digestion program. So to me, that's the biggest low-hanging fruit out there right now, and I think it's sort of a unique symbiotic relationship between wastewater utilities and then the the waste community as well.
All right, perfect. Well, guess what? We are really at the end of today's webinar. It looks like we have responded to most of the questions, and looks like some of our panelists are actually putting some responses in the chat as well. I've also chatted all of our presenters' email addresses. And is it okay for someone to reach out to you all if they have additional questions that we were not able to respond to here today?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Perfect.
absolutely.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a great presentation. I also want to send a big, huge shout out and thank you to ENGIE for sponsoring today's presentation. Again, please look for an email from me tomorrow. And in that email, there will be a link. It will allow you to go back to the landing page. There you will access the recording from today's presentation. And we will also have a PDF of today's presentation there as well. So thank you so much. And if anyone has any parting words, you're more than welcome to say those before we turn it off.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. This concludes today's eShowcase. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at weffiresguide.wef.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with that link. Please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.